Welcome to our PhD webinar. It's great that you can join us today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Lloyd and I work in the graduate school, which is here where we are today in the room here. And it's great that I can be joined today by Lucy, Udeni and Peter, and I'll introduce them a bit more shortly. I'm aware that we have a number of different audiences joining us today. So we've got those that have come along to find a bit more about PhD study. We've got those that are already interested in PhD study. And we've got people who've actually got an offer to study a PhD here with us at Reading. And also we have some current students from the University of Reading who are currently studying an undergraduate or master's course with us. Whichever of these groups that you're in, you're very welcome today. And so before I ask our panel to introduce themselves rather, I just would like to show you how to submit a question to us. So I'm just going to share a slide. Within the software that we have, you should be able to see a bar on the side there that, oh, apologies, it's gone back. Should be able to see some instructions there on the slide there that show you how to extend the control panel and find the questions part and then type your questions into a box, and we'll be picking those up in the second half of the webinar. So do send us a question. It's a great opportunity to ask questions to our PhD researchers. So I do encourage you to send us any question. So let's move on now and let's ask our researchers to introduce themselves. So Lucy, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your research that you've done? Thank you.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm Dr. Lucy Fletcher. I completed a PhD here at the University of Reading back in 2015. Now I work here for the university primarily for the graduate school, so I'm a colleague of Jonathan's here. My PhD was in classics, the discipline of classics, ancient Greek literature, and I worked on a particular author, Plutarch, and looked at his narrative style. I've come to join you today as an alumnus of the university in case people want to talk also about what done after PhD and things like that. So lovely to meet everyone virtually like this.
Thank you, Lucy. Udeni, could you introduce your research and yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
I'm Udeni Jayasinghe. I'm from Sri Lanka and I am a lecturer in my country, and I came here to do my PhD, and I'm on study leave from my university and doing my PhD here. So I'm attached to the biomedical engineering department here. Although my background is computer science, now I'm doing an engineering project. So my project is about using wearable sensor devices on clothing. So I hope most of you are aware of activity and fitness trackers like Fitbits and Apple Watches. So they come as a single unit, so we can mount them on your wrist or waist or on an ankle or like that. But it's not reasonable to look at a single point to measure your whole body movements. So as a solution for that, we are coming up with the clothes. So it's kind of a suit with sensors, so you can put that clothes on in the morning. So it will do all the monitoring for you. So it is like basically we are focusing at people with Parkinson's. So they are having a movement disorder. So we wanted to when it comes to people with Parkinson's, their clinicians do all the adjust the medication depending on their verbal descriptions. So in order to have a systematic way of adjusting medication and those stuff, we came up with this idea. So that's my project is about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter, could you introduce yourself and your research?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Peter. I'm from the UK. I actually come from the sunny south coast of Bournemouth, which I actually miss quite badly at the moment because look at the weather today. But yeah, my PhD focuses on how the food, what we call the food matrix, or the compositional nature of food products, and how, if putting inulin, which is a type of dietary fiber, into these food products, if the food matrix actually alters the prebiotic effect of inulin. And I'm currently in my 3rd year conducting my 2nd human intervention trial.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all of you there. So on to the next question. Lucy, why did you decide to do a PhD in the first place?
That's a great question. I wanted to do a PhD because I had just absolutely loved my undergraduate, my master's degree. I had really loved studying classics. I had written both my undergrad and master's dissertations on Plutarch, who was the author I then went on to write my PhD about. And I just felt that there was more I wanted to do with that study. It wasn't particularly because I had a view to I wanted a job or anything that would require a PhD. I simply wanted to do it and thought it was something that I would enjoy, but also a worthwhile, meaningful thing to do, to spend time working a bit more on Plutarch, making that small contribution to knowledge on the subject that I had loved in my undergrad degree. So yeah, it was purely from enjoyment of the subject.
And are you using some of that knowledge that you have from your PhD in what you're doing now?
Yes, I still teach classics part-time at the university, so some of the time I do get to literally use exactly the kind of knowledge that I developed. I also teach classics in some other areas as well, privately, so I teach Latin and ancient Greek, so those are other skills that I developed. And in terms of wider skills that you learn during PhD, managing a big project, written communication skills, oral communication skills, those are things I use all the time in this job, working in a graduate school. In other things I've done, after my PhD, I was head of classics in a school, so I used a lot of the same sorts of skills that I developed working, teaching full time, as well as I got to teach while I was doing my PhD. So I got some valuable skills that allowed me to go on and do other things afterwards. So yeah.
Thank you. Denny, why did you decide to do a PhD?
So I had two reasons. One is because I started my career as a lecturer. So in order to have promotions in my career, it's a requirement to do a PhD or a master's MPhil in that. So the other one is when I finished my undergraduate degree, we had a 1-year research project. So when I finished that one, as Julie said, I love doing research work. So that made me doing a PhD.
Thank you. Peter, same question. Why did you decide to do a PhD?
This is very different for me, all right? Because my previous background, I spent 15 years as a chef. And in a very long story, I used to weigh 150 kilos and I got very ill. I had an issue with my gut, so hence the relation to gut health, the gut microbiota, and it resulted in a weight loss of 92 kilos of body weight in 10 months. And it left me on a lot of medication just to be able to eat and drink water. And as a result, I had to give up my career as a chef. I became very interested in the gut microbiota and health, as I said. I actually wanted to go and work in gastroenterology, like in dietetics in that area to start with. Went back to study college, then I went on to do an undergraduate in nutrition, then about 2nd year of my undergrad in nutrition. I totally fell in love with food science because having been a pastry chef for 10 of those 15 years that I was a chef. My lecturer at my old university, I shouldn't really say this, but told me to come to Reading to study. So I came to Reading. It was on my list of the ones I wanted to come and look at anyway. I met my current supervisor on the first day I started my master's degree, and let alone 1 year later, I came out with a PhD in the area that I'm on. But after 10 years, I'm actually medication free. So that's kind of where my love of it all comes from. So my PhD to me isn't just someone who wants a qualification. I do it because it's purely personal to me at this point. So, because I just want to help people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's great. So the next question, why did you come to Reading? Peter sort of talked about that a little bit there. Why did you pick Reading, Lucy, for your PhD?
Well, I actually did both my previous degrees at Reading. I did my undergraduate and my master's. And I did apply to other universities as well when it came to PhD, trying to think about where was the right place. But what I really wanted was to work with a particular supervisor. that I had at Reading. So that was sort of the fundamental reason why I wanted to stay here, as well as it has been a fantastic place to study. And I think there was a lot to be said for not having all the upheaval of moving and sticking with the system and everything that you knew. But yeah, primarily for me, it was about the particular supervisor in this department here.
Yeah, thank you. Then, why did you choose Reading? You could have gone anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Reading was your choice. Why was that?
So it's because I wanted to do my PhD in the UK. So I wanted to, with my family, at that time my son was 3 years old, and with my husband. So I wanted my husband to continue his career without any difficulties and problems. So he was from IT field. So I checked for areas where there are lots of IT jobs available. So I found that Reading is a good city for IT people as well. And then I realized that, oh, there's a well-reputed university in the town. And then when I discussed with my senior colleagues in my country, they said that they had collaboration work with the University of Reading and our university way back in 1980s and 1990s. So they recommended the university, highly recommended it. So then I went through all the academic profiles and realized that I want to come to Reading.
Great. You kind of answered it. I don't know whether
Yeah,
you want to add.
I can extend on that. It's often described that I work with royalty because I work with the head of my unit, which is the Food and Microbial Science unit, is Professor Glenn Gibson, and he's like one in the top 1% of researchers like every year, and he is the guy who coined the term prebiotics back in 1995. So Reading is like really highly renowned for its work on the gut microbiota. So it would be foolish to think about going anywhere else in that regard. So
yeah, thank you. So kind of on to research topics and supervisors and that sort of thing. How did you come up with the research topic, Lucy? Was it something that you brought or developed, or how did that come about?
It was something that I brought, yes, it was what I particularly wanted to do. As I mentioned before, I had done both my undergraduate and my master's dissertations on the author that I wanted to work on, Plutarch, and I was particularly interested in narrative. That was partly from stuff that I had read, some existing scholarship, and felt that there was a big sort of gap there, and that was what I wanted to do. So obviously had the advantage having studied the author in the past, but I did develop it a bit also with the supervisor here. As I said, I was a student here, so I knew my supervisor and we were able to discuss various different options, and then agreed on what I wanted to do was viable, and made a good PhD project.
Thank you. Udeni, how did you come up with your project?
Okay, so it is like this. I wanted to do my PhD under the big term called assistive technology. So I wanted to do it for kids who are having difficulties in hand movement, something like that. I came up with a brief research proposal at the beginning, but however, when I came here, I changed my area. Anyway, it's movement monitoring kind of a project I'm doing again, but from the children's to all the adults, I moved my topic. That is because when I came here, I looked at the recently passed out PhD students projects of my supervisor, and there were postdoctoral fellows under my supervisor, and I looked at their projects. And at that time, my supervisor was in a big project, which was a collaborative work with University of Bristol and University of Southampton and University of Reading. So it was a big project about people with Parkinson's. So I thought that it's a nice area as well. So I read a lot of literature about people with Parkinson's and those kind of movement disorders, and how to analyze those movement disorders with wearable sensors and so on. So weekly I had meetings with my supervisor, and eventually we ended up with this topic. So that area.
Yeah, collaboration. Yeah. Peter, how did you arrive at your topic?
So my project was actually a put together project originally, if that makes any sense. So it was already one that was being advertised. But interestingly, the first day I was actually here, I actually met my supervisor and actually who would be the person who would be my supervisor when I was doing my master's degree. And I actually talked to him about putting like different fibers into breads and like putting prebiotics into bread and what the impact this may be. And about 10 months into my master's degree, I was like looking for PhDs at the time because I knew I wanted to do one and ideally stay at Reading. And this one came up as like, you must apply for this, kind of like apply for this. And I got interviewed for 3 different PhDs at the same time that were going on in the department, and they came out with this one. Yeah, so that's how I initially got mine. So
yeah, thank you. So supervisors, I know that we get a lot of questions from prospective students saying, how do I find a supervisor? Do I email them and say, can we have a chat about a project? Or sometimes it's a set project, like in Peter's example. Could you just share just briefly about, how you found your supervisor or that kind of thing, Lucy?
Absolutely, yeah. So in terms of the supervisor I had for my PhD, as I said, is someone I knew in the department because I've been a master's and undergraduate student, so that was quite an obvious one. When I applied also to Oxford and Cambridge as well, and it was based on what I knew of the scholarship. I knew about the topic that I was interested in. I'd obviously worked on it before, but I'd continued to read. So it was reaching out to people at other institutions where I knew there were people working on the topic that I was interested in. And yes, before I put in an application to both of those institutions, I sent just a sort of introductory email saying, this is who I am, this is what I've done, this is what I would like to do. I'm hoping to apply. Would you be happy if I put your name as a prospective supervisor? Ordinarily, when you apply, you're only having to maybe indicate a prospective supervisor. So that was all I asked, and they were the people that I approached were both happy to do that. So I wrote them down and then went down that route.
Thank you. Udeni, how did you find this? How did you come together with your supervisor?
Okay, it is like this. As I said earlier, I wanted to do my project under the Victor Assistive Technology. So I went through the university website and I looked at the academic profiles in every department, and then I searched with that key term, and then I found several publications under my supervisor's name. So I went through them and I read several others' work as well. But I found that my supervisor's interest matched with my requirements. So I directly wrote to him with a CV and a cover letter and with a brief research proposal. I said earlier about the haptic devices for kids kind of thing. So I wrote to him. Luckily, I got a reply from him on the next day. So that's how I started conversation with my supervisor. So then we had several Skype calls and stuff to discuss about projects.
Thank you. Peter, you've kind of said in the project you met your supervisor on the first day of
my master's degree, and it turned out to be he turned out to be my supervisor that was assigned to the project of one of the 3 PhDs that I had turned out to be most interested in, and he kind of wanted someone who had a nutrition background but also had a chemistry, like a food science background. So, and I also have a background as a chef, which makes my knowledge a bit more practical, if that makes any sense, because I have practical input in that as well. So it was kind of like, well, he wanted someone, so I was kind of he chose me as to be his, out of everyone that he interviewed, to be his student, essentially.
Yep.
So I have 2 supervisors. I have him as Professor Bob Raskell as my primary supervisor, and I have Anisha as my secondary supervisor. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of students would have 2 supervisors, some have more, and there might be a main supervisor and a secondary supervisor, or 2 co-supervisors that roughly share it, kind of different. There's different.
Some people have 4.
Yeah, some people have more, but other staff in the team as well, depending on what the nature of the project is. And just to say about supervisors, if you apply for a PhD, you don't have to identify your supervisor in advance. If you're welcome to have a look around on the website under staff profiles, look at their publications. But actually, if you do apply for a PhD, the department or school considering your application will be trying to match you with the appropriate supervisor in that case. So PhD students are quite different from master students and undergraduate students. So I'd just like to sort of ask you if you can talk a bit about what a typical PhD would look like. And I know maybe you do different things every day and it's a huge variety perhaps, but maybe you could just give us a flavour of what a PhD day would have looked like for you, Lucy, please.
Yeah, absolutely. A typical day for me doing my PhD as someone in humanities working on literature, probably the most typical day across those sort of 3-4 years was at home by myself with lots of texts open, reading, writing. That would be interspersed, of course, with days where I would be here on campus, doing things, meeting my supervisor in the library. I also used to very frequently, especially in the early years, go to some of the big research libraries. So in London and in Oxford, because they're so close to Reading, it was easy to commute. So I go and spend the day in the Bodleian Library or up in London. But yeah, most days probably it was just me, my books, at home, often with the dog at my feet, someone to talk to occasionally. But yes, it was quite a solitary kind of few years actually working on that sort of thing. As I say, some days when I'd be here and it'd be great to see people chat about what I was doing and get the odd conference and things, but day to day, me, the books, and the laptop. Yeah.
Thank you. Udeni, what would a typical day look like for you in your PhD?
In my case, I have to say it depended on the stage where I was. So at the beginning, I was reading, and reporting them back to my supervisor and having discussions with. I also have 2 supervisors. So we all 3 of us were discussing and those having chats about the possible research topics and those stuff in the beginning of the PhD. And then they gave me like several wearable devices that I could use and I can play with them and see how the data looks like and sort of things. So I after that I had to come up with my my equipments and those stuffs to do the data collection and stuff. So I used the lab with the help of the technician, as I didn't have an engineering background to make my stuff. So sometimes I spent my time in the lab, and then I collected data from my colleagues as well as from my supervisors as well. So I was basically at the campus most of the time before the pandemic. So I was doing data collection, preparing my clothes and sensors and attaching them to the clothes like that. And then I started my data analysis. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had to start the main data collection. And then now I'm basically working from home, analyzing my data and writing down the pieces.
Thank you. Peter, a typical day, is there one?
There is no typical day when you work in the gut microbiota, I would say. You know, it could be from anything from recruiting volunteers, trying to recruit volunteers, which I'm currently doing, running a human intervention trial, collecting samples from and processing samples from volunteers, you know, helping my lecturer with practicals, you know, teaching undergraduates, supervising master students, running in vitro gut models, so like little mechanical models to study what we're going on, analyzing data. It varies so much on a daily basis, and when you do human intervention trials, you literally have to be on your feet all of you have to be willing to just drop everything at a change sometimes to go and see volunteers. So it's quite sporadic in that regard for me. My day-to-day is no one day is the same for me at the moment. So
thank you. Another question we get asked quite a lot is about whether there are any lectures that you have to do as part of your PhD studies, because in other countries sometimes you have to do like a talk part of the PhD. So I'm just wondering if any of you did attend lectures at all as part of your PhD. Lucy, did you?
Yes, there was no compulsory taught elements to my PhD. I did occasionally go and sit through a series of lectures if I was particularly interested in a new module or something that maybe someone was offering, one of the other members of staff. I also used to like to go, because I was teaching undergraduates from my sort of second year onwards. So in my first year, it was great to go and just go and watch lectures to get a sense of how different people were structuring their classes and doing things like that. So yes, I did attend, sometimes just out of interest in the topic, but also, yeah, for trying to develop how I was going to go on to teach things.
Denny, did you do any lectures here?
There's no requirement to do any lectures for my research. So, but as I didn't have a biomechanics background, I attended a couple of lectures done by my supervisor. As I didn't want to do the exam and the assignment, it was a kind of a relief. So I attended the lectures. Yeah, yeah, that is just to improve my knowledge.
Yeah.
So I attended.
So Peter, did you?
There's no requirement for me to do any lectures as part of my PhD. I do spend a lot of my time helping my supervisors, like I said, teach first year, second year undergraduates basic biochemistry and things along in practical classes, stuff along those lines. And I do help supervisors, undergraduate and master students with their dissertations as well. So that's kind of especially with their lab work.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of what I have to do as part of my PhD.
Yeah, thank you. So generally speaking, a PhD doesn't include a talk component, but there are some programs at Reading where there is a requirement to do certain modules and to get a specific level of mark in them in order to progress, but there's a very small number of those. And sometimes, as some examples here, students want to brush up their knowledge in a particular area, so they might go along to a lecture and just listen and learn in that way. So shall we move on to think about funding? So funding is obviously a really important part of PhD activity, because you need funding really from some source in order to be able to spend the time doing a PhD. Could I just ask you to share about how you were funded, each of you? Lucy, could you start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really fortunate. I had full studentship from one of the UK research councils, the HRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So that paid my fee and a stipend, a living expense. When I applied, I mean, these things are so competitive. I did not expect to be fortunate and to have got that. So I was actually intending to do it part-time and work to pay the PhD, so study over a longer period and do the two things together. And then, as it was, yes, I was just very fortunate and got the AHRC studentship.
That's great. Denny, how do you fund your PhD?
Okay, it's like I got a partial scholarship from my country. It was able to roughly cover 1/3 of the tuition fee from here, but the rest of the thing I had to pay. But I was lucky enough to get some part-time jobs from my supervisors. I was able to work as a data analyst for a couple of projects, and they were funded by by one of my supervisors' grants, and the other one was from 2 projects were funded by Department of Agriculture, and another one from Food and Nutritional Sciences. And again, I was able to work with one of the local companies called Chimera Sports Clothing Company. So I was able to work with them because my supervisor is doing a KTP project with them. So I had those chances, and I worked as a demonstrator, and I helped open days and like that. So I was able to earn that money from the university itself. And
the money from your country that funds you, is that from your employer or is that the government?
It's kind of a government, because our university is a state university, so there's a university grant commission, so that they are the funders. Yeah, they are the sponsors.
Thank you. Peter, you mentioned earlier that yours is a project that was set.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about how your project is funded?
I'm indefinitely funded. I'm indefinitely funded by a company who produces carbohydrates. I'll just be full disclosure there. So, but they pay for my stipend. They pay for my stipend. They pay for my bench fees. They pay for all of my consumables. So yeah, I'm literally fully funded from start to the end of my PhD.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's great.
So
Thank you. I was just going to share a slide now just about funding at the University of Reading, just briefly show you that. So that's the website address if you want to have a look at the funding that we have at the university. We do list all of our funding on this one web page. It does change quite a lot because things come up across the year, and at the moment we're listing several different projects that have just come up recently that are collaborative PhD projects with different organisations and businesses and charities, etc. We do also share about all of our funding as it comes up on our Twitter account and on our Facebook accounts. That's kind of a good way of keeping in touch with what the latest or the new funding opportunities are. And also, if you have questions specifically about funding, Lucy here is a doctoral studentships officer, and she'll be very pleased to answer your questions. If you wanted to email Lucy here on that email address there on your screen, you can ask about funding. And I would say this time of year, a lot of the competitions that come up regularly from across the year are not open for applications at this time of year, but the information is still there, and many of the competitions open in the autumn term. So if you check back a bit closer to the autumn, you'll see the details there. So I will just stop sharing that, and I will ask another question. So highlights. What would you say are the highlights of your PhD so far if you're a current student? And Lucy, what would you say were the highlights of your PhD?
Oh, I have to say, I just loved it. I said I wanted to do a PhD because I was so interested in the topic, and so I just had a wonderful 4 years. I loved every day, just surrounded by my books. Lots of people always thought, oh gosh, you sit by yourself reading all day. I loved that. I had a wonderful time. But other highlights, I mean, I went to some great conferences, which took me to some really interesting places outside of the UK and inside. Did some placements, which maybe we talk about placements later. And I met some wonderful people here at the university, but also in the wider discipline. Those were definitely highlights for me. And publishing things. I love writing and things, and so seeing them actually in print, that was a real highlight for me.
Yeah. Denny, your highlights so far. I know you're not yet finished, but
Yes.
what
So
could you share?
as Lucy said, I also enjoyed working with those wearable sensors. At the beginning, I got the opportunity to use several commercial products, so they were really nice, and I played with them, yes. And when it comes to other things like publications, I was able to publish a journal paper at the end of my second year, and then in my third year I was awarded as the researcher of the year from the biomedical engineering department. And last year I presented at a conference, and I won the second prize for the best poster one. So they are the highlights up to now. Yeah.
Peter, have you got some highlights?
the highlights was actually completing a human trial during the middle of a pandemic for me. I think I talked to you about this before, right? But I ended up doing no volunteers were allowed on campus, and the campus was empty because it was the middle of lockdown. So I ended up doing 4,500 kilometers of cycling for that human trial, to volunteers' houses to drop off products, collect samples for 100 volunteers. I also published a paper. I have 3 more papers in for publishing currently, and I'm off to the ISAC conference as an early career research speaker in June as well. So I'm off to Spain. I've never been to Spain. So yeah, no, it's been a bit of a wild ride to say the least. So
Spain's great. We'll have a great time there. I just want to ask you one more question in this part, and then we'll move on to some of the questions that the participants have sent in. And it's really, what would you like to, what are you, after your PhD, you're kind of doing it, Lisa, this is a difficult question, but after you finish your PhD, maybe I'll ask you, Denny and Peter this, what do you want to be doing next after your PhD?
You know, I'm on study leave from my university in Sri Lanka, so they are looking forward to have me back there in the university, so I need to go back and work for my university. Yeah, so that's...
Peter, have you got any ideas what you would like to do next?
If my supervisor and the other supervisor in the department can find the money, they want to keep me on as a postdoc. they would like desperate to keep me on as a postdoctoral researcher. If that doesn't happen, I may look for another university to the postdoc, or I may end up going working in industry, because I could quite see myself working on like, there's a big trend in the food industry putting like novel carbohydrates into cereals at the moment. So I could kind of see myself doing that as well, working for someone like Kellogg's or Nestle and looking at something like that otherwise.
Yeah, well, so, I hope we managed to keep you as a postdoc at Reading. Yeah, continuing with research then is.
Yeah, I would love to continue with research. I like the balance that I get between being in the lab and teaching and stuff like that as well. So I'd like to continue that balance.
Yeah.
So
great, thank you very much. So we're now going to just move across to looking at some of the questions that you've sent us in. Thank you for sending those in. We'll try and answer as many as we can with the time that we've got, but if we can't answer your question today, then we'll make sure we get back to you shortly after the webinar, as soon as we can. So, so a question we've got about is, do we need a research-based master's to apply for a PhD? Is it likely that you'd be accepted if you don't have? Do you have to have a master's in order to have a, be able to get onto a PhD program? And well, Lucy, would you like to comment on whether it's necessary to have a master's?
Talking from like my PhD background in humanities, it's pretty much standard, yes, to have a master's degree in a related field. Doesn't have to be the same field, but to have a master's is pretty much the usual thing. It doesn't have to be a specifically like an MRes or a research-based master's degree, but ordinarily, yes, in the humanities, you would be most likely you would have a master's degree.
Yeah, and in the sciences at the University of Reading, it's possible to go on from a bachelor's degree as long as you've got a 2-1 or better to jump straight to a PhD. But there are a number of students that have a master's, like Peter had, but it isn't a requirement like it is in the arts and humanities and social sciences and the business areas, where it's more expected that you would have a master's first. So another question about how much detail do you need to know about your interest in a subject before you can talk to a supervisor? Would any of you like to pick that one up?
I would say if you're going to talk to a potential supervisor about your potential area of research, I would have a good idea of what the background research actually says. And if you're going to look at a specific supervisor at a university, look at what they do, and if you're interested in working up to supervisor, look through their previous papers, look through what they do, look through what they teach, have a really good idea of what they do, because then ultimately you're going to have to work with them for the next 3 or 4 years, right? So you want to make sure it's the correct person that you go to work with. But I think it's a pretty bad idea to go into a meeting with a potential supervisor and not actually having looked at what you actually want to study, right? My best advice, right, is you want to study this for 3 or 4 years, you have to make sure you're going to be interested in it keep the interest, right? Because there is some long, hard days when it goes with it, right? So,
yeah, that's great advice. And I think we do have members of staff in our schools and departments called directors of postgraduate research studies. And I think if you've got a general idea of what you want to do, it might be in biological sciences just generally, or it might be in meteorology or anything, you can go to them and say, I really like this in this area, but I'm not quite sure about whether you have any supervisors with expertise in this area. And they will be able to say, oh, why don't you talk to this person or contact that person? So I would suggest that you contact a director of postgraduate research there. And it doesn't matter so much if you haven't quite focused what you want to know, because they will be able to steer you in the right direction. So there's a question about PhD online, which I'll just answer. It's about whether you can study a PhD online. We don't have actually what we call an online PhD, but we do have a PhD by distance, which is where you're based away from the university. You have supervisors in the same way. They have to approve the topic that you're studying and make sure you've got the resources and support that you need to be able to do it away from the university. That's available on a full-time and part-time basis. And the way the supervision works is basically it's a video call with your supervisors. and you have access to the library electronically at the university, and there's some transferable skills training as well. And the good thing about doing it that way is that, I mean, obviously you can stay in your present circumstances and depending on your situation at home, works well with that. And also there is a substantial fee reduction on that type of study at the moment. So definitely, if you want to have a look at that, you can find that on the graduate school website, more information about that, which I can show you at the end. So somebody is interested in doing a history and linguistics kind of joint PhD, spanning both areas. How would they know who to contact first? Would it be the history one or the linguistics one? What would we suggest on that?
I think maybe if it were me, I would probably look through the staff pages in both departments, and I would see if there was somebody who was obviously in an area. So maybe you find a history professor who's very clearly aligned to your project, more so than in linguistics, in which case I would contact the history person, or vice versa if it was linguistics. Or as John was saying before, to write to the PGR, the Postgraduate Research Director, in both of the schools, one email and copy to both of them and say, this is what I'm interested in doing. Could you advise me in terms of, it's like we were saying before, you often have a first and a second supervisor, and they can be in different departments, can't they? So the postgraduate research directors would be probably a good place to start as well, I would say. And they're all listed on our website, aren't they, the graduate school?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Lucy. Udeni, there's a question that I'd like you to think about, which is if you're coming in to start a PhD and say you've got an offer to start in September, what should you be doing to prepare yourself as you come to Reading in a few months' time? What would you suggest for someone who might be starting soon? Should they be doing anything in particular, would you say?
Other than reading the research papers related to their area, I think nothing else. I mean, they need to have an idea as to how they should continue their project. So then you don't need to waste a long time coming up with the title at the beginning. So you better have a proper idea by reading the interested research topic.
Yeah. Peter, have you got anything to add to that? Any advice at all?
I just did lots of, trouble is, I finished my master's and literally within 2 weeks started my PhD. So I literally was thrown straight in at the deep end onto it. So, but I already knew what I was getting into a couple of months before I started my PhD. But I just did a lot of background reading before I started, looking at papers, making sure that I had to find somewhere to live as well. So I think that's quite important as well. If you're going to be moving to Reading, is to obviously make sure you have somewhere to live and stuff like this, because Reading's a big place as well. But it's finding somewhere you're going to be comfortable, that you can work from home, but also on campus as well. Yeah,
certainly. I mean, there's lots of opportunities of different places to live around the edge of the campus and just in the surrounding areas. But obviously, prices vary, and you might need to take a bus or cycle or whatever, but there's plenty of private accommodation as well as the university halls of residence that are available as options. So a question about obviously going on to be doing some sort of teaching career or lecturing career. It seems quite popular for people who have PhDs, but are there any other options for people who don't want to go into that career? I would say certainly I know of lots of PhD students that have gone on to do different things, and I think the skills that you are developing and polishing and picking up as you are doing a PhD can be transferred to many different careers essentially. And for example, you're able to handle data, you're able to explain something quite complicated to make it understandable to people. There are all sorts of skills, communication skills, and a number of other skills as well. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
I guess having gone straight from PhD, I went to be a head of department in a school, which was great for a while, but it wasn't what I wanted to do longer term as it transpired. And then I came to work here as an associate lecturer, which was primarily a teaching role. And I did that for a few years, but actually, so I did a lot of teaching. That seemed like, as this person is saying, the obvious thing to do, especially with a humanities PhD. But it was not what I wanted to do full time, and I've come to work now as part of university administration, which I find that's a fantastic way of spending time, because you're still working in higher education and still supporting students and doing things like that. And it allows me a lot more time than I ever had as a teacher, either in a school or in a university, to continue with research. As I was saying, I loved my research, I really enjoyed it. It's something that I continue to enjoy. And so when I can do that in my own time, I continue to publish. I have a manuscript of a book completed now, as well as various articles. So having a job which is not, where research is not part of your job, doesn't mean you can't continue to research. And I do, as we said before, also do a bit of teaching. And doing a bit of teaching is much more enjoyable, I find, than doing it full time. So yeah, on the teaching side.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a lot of colleagues from food and nutritional sciences who have completely left teaching altogether, and they've gone to work as like scientific communication officers in like Actimel, or work at clinical researchers in like GSK and stuff, GlaxoSmithKline and stuff like this. So there's plenty of opportunities in the industry. I got friends who work at Nestle, for example, in the nutrition team. So there's plenty of opportunities to work outside of what you just did your PhD on. It's where you want to go with it, right? So you have a lot of skills, as you were saying, that you can be transferred to other areas. So it's just being willing to look outside of your bubble. That's the way I often describe it to people. Sometimes you have to step outside of your comfort zone if you really want to do something as well, you know?
Yeah,
so
really helpful, thank you. And I think I'm just remembering an example of a PhD student who's gone on to set up a business in renewable energy to do with battery storage from solar panels, I think, and it's really taken off, this business. It's one of the leading businesses in Europe in this area now, and it's like there's an entrepreneurship side as well, but you have the skills to be able to, you know, go out into business as well. So yeah. Question about how long is a PhD? There's a full-time PhD and there's a part-time PhD. There are different lengths. Would you like to comment on that, Lucy?
Yeah, so full-time PhD, you have a minimum of 3 years, maximum of 4 years. If you, at Reading, if you are doing it part-time, you have a minimum of 4 years and a maximum of 6 years to complete it. So it's not quite double the length of the part-time. So I did my PhD full-time, and it took me a full 4 years. I didn't complete it in the minimum period of 3 years. I submitted it 4 years after I started. So yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. So a question about the first year of a PhD. When you're coming in new, you don't quite know how it's going to be, kind of getting to know your supervisor, and that relationship is really important, isn't it? Because that is a close working relationship. How does the first year work, and what advice would you give to someone who might be a bit worried about their first year and how it's going to go? Eugenia, would you care to comment on any advice on this?
You mean getting familiarized with the supervisor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What was it like getting? Was it difficult getting to know what your supervisor wanted and expected, and how you could have that good working relationship with the supervisor?
So in my case, I have to say that both my supervisors are really friendly, approachable people. So they are really expert in their subject domain. And as they are really friendly and approachable, I didn't have any worries, because whenever I had a problem before the pandemic, I could go to them and clarify my ideas. And I think they are really friendly. I think most of the academics who are in the University of Reading are friendly, and we can talk to them and clarify our problems, because I came with a computer science background. And my both supervisors helped me to do my PhD in biomedical engineering. they are really supportive, and their guidance is helped me immensely to come to this point. So I think when you can read and get teach yourself a bit, so they will be help you.
Any advice for someone starting off a bit concerned or about the supervisor relationship?
Well, it's kind of different for me because I already knew my supervisor from my master's degree. But the one thing I will say is we have like bi-weekly or monthly meetings to discuss things. I suppose if I wanted to give you some advice, because I have an industrial sponsor and quite a lot of PhDs in food and nutritional sciences do have industrial sponsors. For me, the biggest challenge was getting to know what my industrial sponsors actually wanted and becoming about like a good working relationship with them, because they want it to go in one direction. Obviously, your PhD has to go in a certain direction. That it's coming to learn to find that balance between the pair of you. And working for a big company, they're quite demanding a lot of the time. So it's striking a balance between getting the work done that they want, but also keeping your supervisor happy at the same time. So yeah, it takes a lot of work to start with, but generally, we come to work out a balance in the end over it all. But some other advice, like it's not so much just like your supervisor, but if you know other people within the department as well, make sure you get involved with them. Go to, we used to have, before the pandemic, we used to have like Cake Club on a Friday, for example. So we all used to meet up and stuff like this. We occasionally organise nights out. Get yourself involved with the PhD community, right? Everyone understands that you are pressured and you're there to do a PhD, but everyone wants you to succeed at the same time. Like in our department, we all get involved in each other's studies because we know how hard it is to recruit volunteers, right? So I think learning to get along with your cohort as such, or the people you work within the same office with, is a really big thing when you move forward. It only makes life easier for you, not harder.
Yeah, thank you. Just to mention about the first year, but actually it's all the years. The graduate school has some training, transferable skills training called the Reading Research and Development Programme. And that is something that all students are asked to do during their different years of their PhD. And that's actually something that is a really good way of meeting people outside of your main area. So we might have people from all different subjects in some of these training workshops that are quite small. And I think that's a great way of, networking across the university and meeting people who you wouldn't normally come across in your day-to-day research. And also it's a way of picking up some of or developing your transferable skills in a number of areas. I think we've got about 70 different courses, so it's quite an extensive program, and the feedback's always really, really positive when people do these training courses. So there's a question here about how easy is it for someone with a family to come and settle here? Maybe somebody who's married or has got children as well, or just a partner coming with them. How easy is it for them to come to Reading and to be in school and stuff? I don't know, Denny, whether you have any experience of this in terms of moving here.
Yeah.
Have you got your family with you?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you give us some advice on how you found that and any thoughts?
Okay, so at the beginning, I booked the university accommodation because the University of Reading offered family accommodation for the families. So that was a great help, because otherwise, in order to get an accommodation, we need to do the credit check and those stuff. So as the family accommodation is available at the University of Reading, that was a great help for us. So we came there. Luckily, my husband got like an intercompany transfer from his company to the UK company. So it was a great help for me at that moment. But anyway, in Reading, I think there are lots of other jobs. The partner can work full time. So it's a good thing. And when it comes to the childcare thing, it was the kind of difficult thing, because it's kind of expensive. So the university has a nursery and it has a long waiting list. So if you are planning to move with the family and if you need the daycare facilities, you need to talk to the nursery. It's called Little Friends, I can't remember, Little Learners Nursery or something like that. So you need to talk to them. So if there's a waiting list, you can add your name to the waiting list. In my case, I couldn't get an opportunity from the university nursery, so I had to send my son to another different nursery. After that, my son has started schooling now, so it's free. So you can, you don't need to worry about this schools. They are free, and there are good schools around Reading.
Thank you. Yeah, we know that a number of our PhD students do come here with their families, international students mainly, and yeah, I think there's a newcomers club which you can access to kind of meet other families and people with the same kind of situation as you. And yeah, there are other nurseries around if the university one is particularly busy around the local area. So yeah, a number of students do bring their families. Another question about how often you meet with your supervisors, and I think this might vary according to your supervisor and how they like to work, but also different subject areas. So maybe I could ask all three of you, Lucy first, how often did you meet with your supervisors roughly?
Yeah, so that changed through time. When I first started my first year, I met my supervisor every 2 weeks, and he had always asked me to write something. So I think that's a common misconception. People think you don't write until later on in the process, but actually he made me read and respond to texts and scholarship right from the beginning. So we met, yeah, every 2 weeks to discuss what I had written. And that then started to become less through time. So my second year, we maybe every month. And then by the third year, we had pushed it back again to more like every 6 weeks. But we did meet regularly to talk through things I had written. As we went later as well, we met more ad hoc for things like I'd written conference papers I was presenting. So we'd have extra things like that. But it was a regular thing from the start. It just became a bit wider in between as we went through.
Udeni, how often do you meet with your supervisors?
So I have weekly meetings with my supervisors. So it didn't change after the pandemic even. So we had weekly meetings online. Still, we are having once a week meetings. In addition to that, we are having a journal club as well. So in that case also, I meet my supervisor. So twice a week, I meet my supervisor actually. So in order to talk about my project, we are meeting once a week. So we all three of us meeting together. So then there won't be any other. So we don't need to clarify the things with one by one. So we can talk together once a week.
Thank you. Peter, what's it like for you?
So it started off every 2 weeks to start with. And then it progressively moved over time to every month. We do tend to meet, like, because I do have to I have a meeting with my sponsors every month, like it's like clockwork every month with my sponsors. So we do tend to meet up before that as well, if we need to just go over what I've done, put in a presentation for them, because they're always keen to see what the latest data from the latest trial is looking like, or something along these sort of lines, where I am with papers and stuff like that. So we do meet. My supervisor is quite open. He has an open door policy because he's also the senior academic tutor. So if he is free and I just need a question, then I can just pop in and ask him quickly. But I often see him enough in labs just to talk to him while he's doing that. So I don't try and bother him as much because he is quite busy with other students. So my other supervisor is currently only just started to come back from maternity leave. So I very regularly have touch with her at the moment, unless I need her for analytical analysis. So yeah, no, but over time it does tend to get less and less, especially when you're in the thick of human trials as well.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of research events though, aren't there, as well? Like in the departments we have, especially before the pandemic, we had like research seminars on a regular basis, lots of that kind of thing. So you meet your supervisors also in informal kind of settings as well as other academics.
So in addition to that, I actually sit on 2 committees within our department. So I sit on the PhD Student and Staff Wellbeing Committee. So I'm the PhD representative for that. But I also sit on what is known as our Wednesday lunchtime seminar committee as well. So I organise PhD students and outside speakers to come and talk to us, all of them, BScs, MScs, and PhDs to come and staff to come and talk to us Before the pandemic and before in autumn term, we used to do it face to face, but currently it's all online on Teams, and we would really like to go back to face as much as possible. Just because for PhD students, quite a lot of your vivas will go back to face to face. Well, all ours are going back to face to face anyway, and majority of them are as well, right? So, but we feel like for PhD students, it's really good to like give a talk in front of people, and also to answer questions from other academics, PhDs, your peers, because that only prepares you for your viva as well, right? And so that's what we would like to do.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. A question about assessment. So obviously in other types of degree, you do continuous assessment and you might do exams at the every other year. PhD is not quite like that. Would you care to current students to share about how your progress is monitored and the feedback you get? And yeah, we haven't got that much time left. This is probably going to be the last question. We may squeeze another one in. We'll see how we go. But
okay, so we were monitored by the reports. So at the end of the 6 months, we need to submit the literature review, and then at the end of the first year, in between 12th month and 16th month, we needed to submit a report called confirmation report. So after that, we need to do a presentation in front of our internal examiners at the university. And again, at the beginning of the second year, we need to, at the end of the second year, we need to do another presentation in front of our internal examiners. So, so after that, the final thesis and the final viva. Yeah.
Yeah. So the confirmation of registration is like a benchmarking of how the progress is going.
I call it a mini viva.
Mini viva. Are we on the right track? That sort of thing. And I know that the timings can vary between departments about how many kind of these sort of progress reviews you have and when they
every 6 months for me.
So big pieces.
That's every 6 months. So we have 6 months, then we have a viva at 12 months, we have a monitoring report 18 months, then 24 months, then 30, then 36 months, and if it goes into the 4th year, then it goes into all of 42, then 48 if need be. So ours are every 6 months, but they're like 1,000 word reports that we have to write, and the viva was like 40 pages or something. So 40-page report, and then you get internal examiners assessed, as I will put it, right? But it only goes on for about, well, mine for about an hour generally in our department, if that, maybe a bit longer. It varies.
Thank you very much. I think we're just about out of time now, so thank you so much for all the great questions that we've had come in, and sorry for the ones that we haven't been able to answer, but we will get back to you with answers after the webinar. I'm just going to share one more slide, which is just to show you just some more about PhD researchers doing their thing, just to show you how varied it is at the University of Reading, and also a final slide after this one, in fact. It's just to show you some ways in which you can contact us if you've got further questions or you'd like further information. The graduate school website is quite a good resource in terms of going there and then going off to the different schools and departments, and also showing you about funding and training and other aspects of being a doctoral researcher at the university, and also the Twitter and Facebook accounts, a good way of keeping in touch with their community. It's great that you could join us today, and it's been fantastic to hear from our panel of experts. I'd like to thank you so much for being here, and thanks very much to Lucy, Udeni, and to Peter, and we wish you a great remainder of the day. Thank you so much.